Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager of the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 6 of our read-along together of The Cricket on the Hearth by Charles Dickens. Today is going to be our last read-along of the year. Yeah! We've read altogether, if you've been with us since April, we've read 7 books together. And so we are going to finish our last one. It's kind of exciting. These last 2 have been short, but still, 7. I think that's a good accomplishment for us. And I'm sure you've been reading lots of other books too. Let's see. Oh, I did want to mention a couple of things to you. Let's see. Let me start by pouring out the tea. We can talk while I'm pouring and drinking. Today's tea that I'm enjoying is the bourbon vanilla from Point Loma Tea. It's a loose leaf tea. Hello! It's good to see you. Let's see. Yeah, this one's a fun one. I like that it has a really intense vanilla smell. I was actually drinking this a lot when we were reading Count of Monte Cristo, because that was set during the Bourbon period, the Bourbon Restoration, I think is what it was called, a period of French history. And so having a bourbon vanilla just seemed very appropriate. And also it's delicious. So that's a nice tea. Very hot, but very good. I should probably start making my tea a little earlier in the day, just so I have a few more minutes of rest in between, but oh, let's see. That will be a New Year's resolution for next year. Speaking of New Year's resolutions, we are counting down to this past year. And so you still have a little bit of time if you'd like to vote on what was your favorite read-along book of this year. We will announce it tomorrow, and the announcement will not be much of a surprise because the poll is there, but you know, it's just for fun. Let's see. So that's one thing. The other thing I was just going to remind you guys, we are going to be beginning our read along of The Great Gatsby on January the 11th. Next week, there's going to be 4 different short stories because I'm taking the week off. Hello! And so I've already selected 3 stories, but I have room for 1 more. And so if there is a short story that is published in 1925 or earlier that you really love, go ahead and comment on it and I'll add that one in. Otherwise, I have seriously been poring over a whole bunch of collections of stories trying to figure out like which is the best story for us. And it's really hard. So if there's a story that you love, go ahead and recommend it so I can choose that one. Let's see. Was there anything else? Oh, and one more thing too. One thing more. I decided to do a little New Year's Eve party. New Year's Eve tea party. And so tomorrow, if you'd like to join us at our usual tea time of 3 o'clock, we'll have a New Year's Eve tea. We can talk about cricket on the hearth, but we can also just have a tea party, a New Year's Eve tea party. So that'll be at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Because we had some problems last time with Facebook rooms where somebody wasn't able to log in, I moved us back to Zoom. And so there is an event in our group where you can see the direct link to the Zoom meeting. Also, if you could please RSVP that you're interested in attending the meeting, I'll send you directly the passcode and the meeting ID. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow if you can join us. And not, I will see you virtually, sort of like we can have some short stories together on next week, but I will definitely see you again live the following week on January 11th. So all the housekeeping out of the way, let's go to the conclusion of Chirp the Third, and which is also the conclusion of Cricket on the Hearth. So in yesterday's reading, we started Chirp the Third, and it was really sad. It was so sweet, but so sad. So in Chirp the Third, it started out with John the carrier, John Peerybingle, going back to his house and thinking about how he is afraid that his wife basically is deceiving him, that that she might be having some sort of assignation with the gentleman who is staying at their house, who had been pretending to be an older man, but he saw Dot with this man with his arm around his wife Dot, and that she was adjusting the white wig on him and laughing and smiling, and so he is worried that she is deceiving him, that there is something going on with her and this other man. And he's angry at first, and he loves her, but he's angry and he's confused and he's sad. And then when she goes to sit by him, he doesn't accuse her of anything directly, but she can tell there's something wrong and that he is upset at her. And it sort of seems that she knows what he's thinking, but she doesn't defend herself in any way. And so she goes in the other room, and so he's alone there by the hearth, and he has this moment of hesitate to say madness, but of desperation, where he is very angry and he looks across and he sees a gun mounted on the wall and he decides he's going to go take this gun and interrogate the older man, or supposed to be an older man who's staying at their house. And so he goes to approach the door, and he's going to start by like pounding on the door with the butt of the gun, when suddenly the cricket on the hearth starts chirping. And when he hears that music, he stops. It pulls him back to himself, and he remembers the things that Dot has said, and he says that the cricket stands in fairy shape before him. So again, this idea that Dickens is saying is that the cricket on the hearth, the symbol of luck and happiness for the home, is characterized by the, like the fairies who guard your home too. And so the cricket becomes the fairy, and the fairy speaks to him, and it repeats the words that Dot had said back in the beginning in the first chirp, where she had said, the little cricket song had been, a comfort to her, that it'd been the music that had pleased her so often. It had been the music that had been like, she had heard it when she first approached that first night as a newlywed, and so many nights when she was alone before they had their child, and when she was worried that John, could he ever love her, that the cricket had soothed her and consoled her and brought her happiness and joy, or comfort. And so when he hears the sound of the cricket, he hears these words that Dot has said to him again. And then the cricket and the fairies end up showing him images of Dot and him and their happiness, and how this house became a home because of Dot, and just basically saying that he needs to trust her, that he can trust in his love for her. And he's upset and he's angry, and he says, well, I did love her, and the cricket says, no, you do love her. And so he's upset, and he stays up all night just thinking and thinking and pondering. And in the morning, Tackleton comes, and this is actually Tackleton's wedding day and the anniversary of Dot and John. And Tackleton comes to see him, and they talk a little bit. And basically, Tackleton goes in to see if the gentleman is still there, and he's gone. He's left the premises. He left his door locked, but he'd climbed out a window and disappeared. And he's like, well, did you do something to him? And it's like, no. He's like, I thought about it, but I didn't do it. And then what John ends up saying is something that stuns Tackleton. He says he doesn't blame Dot, that he blames himself, and that he didn't consider how much younger Dot was than him. He thought that she could love him. I mean, he knew she was younger, but he thought that she could come to love him and care about him as much as he cared about her. But he felt that what he had done by marrying her was selfish, because he had taken her away from, the younger set that was about her. And that he said, I often thought that though I wasn't good enough for her, I should make her a good husband, and perhaps know her value better than another. And in this way I reconciled it to myself, and came to think it might be possible that we should be married. And in the end it came about we were married. But I had not sufficiently considered her. And so he says basically to Tackleton that because he loves her so much, he's willing to let her go back to her parents, and that he won't hold on to her that way, and force her to stay married to him, or to live as his wife. And Dot at some point hears what he says to Tackleton, and she comes out and she cries and she says, no, John, it's not over. Don't say it's over. I've heard your noble words. I couldn't steal away. Do not say it's over. And John and Dot are both quite upset. Tackleton ends up leaving. He's going to go to the wedding. Tilly Slowboy, the nanny, comes back in and says, don't cry to the mistress. And then our chapter twisted again, or our chirp, excuse me, because Caleb Plummer came in with his daughter Bertha. Now, mind you, this is the wedding day of Tackleton, whom Bertha has convinced herself that she is in love with, because she has this false idea of who he is based on Caleb Plummer's benevolent deceptions, let's say, that he was trying to create a better world than they actually live in for his blind daughter, since she couldn't see the truth. He tried to make something better than the truth for her. But unfortunately, it led to her having unrealistic ideas about who Tackleton is. So now, on this day of the marriage, Bertha is not going to go to the marriage, and she hears that Dot's not going to go. So she goes with her father to visit Dot. And they both basically say, we've heard that there's something about, they're like basically things being said about you that we know they can't be true. And Caleb pulls Dot aside and he says, I've been thinking about what I've done. I've been blaming myself. And he says, I've come to the conclusion that I need to tell her the truth. And he asks Dot to stay with him while he tells her. And he's worried. He confesses that she may not care for her father afterwards when she learns the truth about how he's deceived her so much and for so long. So I'll start with the last paragraph that we read together because it's just a nice transition to where we're going today. Let's go ahead and continue with Chirp the Third, which is our conclusion of The Cricket on the Hearth by Charles Dickens. We'll go back a couple paragraphs, actually. They were wrong, he said. I knew it, cried Bertha proudly. I told them so. I scorned to hear a word. Blame her with justice? She pressed the hand between her own and the soft cheek against her face. No, I am not so blind as that. Her father went on one side of her, while Dot remained upon the other, holding her hand. I know you all, said Bertha, better than you think, but none so well as her. Not even you, father. There is nothing half so real and so true about me as she is. If I could be restored to sight this instant and not a word were spoken, I could choose her from a crowd. My sister. Bertha, my dear, said Caleb, I have something on my mind I want to tell you while we three are alone. Hear me kindly. I have a confession to make to you, my darling. A confession, father? I have wandered from the truth and lost myself, my child, said Caleb, with a pitiable expression in his bewildered face. I have wandered from the truth, intending to be kind to you, and have been cruel. She turned her wonder-stricken face toward him and repeated, Cruel? He accuses himself too strongly, Bertha, said Dot. You'll say so presently. You'll be the first to tell him so. He cruel to me? Cried Bertha, with a smile of incredulity. Not meaning it, my child, said Caleb, but I have been, though I never suspected it till yesterday. My dear blind daughter, hear me and forgive me. The world you live in, heart of mine, doesn't exist as I have represented it. The eyes you have trusted in have been false to you. She turned her wonder-stricken face towards him still, but drew back and clung closer to her friend. Your road in life was rough, my poor one, said Caleb, and I meant to smooth it for you. I have altered objects, changed the characters of people, invented many things that never have been, to make you happier. I have had concealments from you, put deceptions on you, God forgive me, and surrounded you with fancies. But living people are not fancies, she said hurriedly, and turning very pale and still retiring from him. You can't change them. I have done so, Bertha, pleaded Caleb. There is one person that you know, my dove. Oh, father, why do you say I know? She answered in a term of keen reproach. What and whom do I know? I who have no leader, I so miserably blind. In the anguish of her heart, she stretched out her hands, as if she were groping in her way, then spread them in a manner most forlorn and sad upon her face. The marriage that takes place today, said Caleb, is with a stern, sordid, grinding man, a hard master to you and me, my dear, for many years, ugly in his looks and in his nature, cold and callous always, unlike what I have painted him to you in everything, my child, in everything. Oh, why? Cried the blind girl, tortured as it seemed, almost beyond endurance. Why did you ever do this? Why did you ever fill my heart so full, and then come in like death and tear away the objects of my love? Oh, heaven, how blind I am! How helpless and alone! Her afflicted father hung his head, and offered no reply but in his penitence and sorrow. She had been but a short time in this passion of regret when the cricket on the hearth, unheard by all but her, began to chirp. Not merrily, but in a low, faint, sorrowing way. It was so mournful that her tears began to flow, and when the presence which had been beside the carrier all night appeared behind her, pointing to her father, they fell down like rain. She heard the cricket voice more plainly soon, and was conscious through her blindness of the presence hovering about her father. "Mary," said the blind girl, "tell me what my home is, what it truly is." "It is a poor place, Bertha, very poor and bare indeed. The house will scarcely keep out wind and rain another winter. It is as roughly shielded from the weather, Bertha," Dot continued in a low, clear voice, "as your poor father in his sackcloth coat." The blind girl, greatly agitated, rose and led the carrier's little wife aside. "Those presents that I took such care of, that came almost at my wish and were so dearly welcome to me," she said, trembling. "Where did they come from? Did you send them?" "No." "Who then?" Dot saw she knew already and was silent. The blind girl spread her hands before her face again, but in quite another manner now. "Dear Mary, a moment, one moment. More this way. Speak softly to me. You are true, I know. You'd not deceive me now, would you?" "No, Bertha, indeed." "No, I am sure you would not. You have too much pity for me. Mary, look across the room to where we were just now, to where my father is. My father, so compassionate and loving to me, and tell me what you see." "I see," said Dot, who understood her well, "an old man sitting in a chair and leaning sorrowfully on the back with his face resting on his hand, as if his child should comfort him, Bertha." "Yes, yes, she will. Go on." "He is an old man, worn with care and work. He is a spare, dejected, thoughtful, gray-haired man. I see him now, despondent and bowed down, and striving against nothing. But, Bertha, I have seen him many times before, and striving hard in many ways for one great sacred object, and I honor his gray head, and bless him." The blind girl broke from her, and throwing herself upon her knees before him, took the gray head to her breast. "It is my sight restored. It is my sight," she cried. "I have been blind, and now my eyes are open. I never knew him. To think I might have died, and never truly seen the father who had been so loving to me." There were no words for Caleb's emotion. "There is not a gallant figure on this earth," exclaimed the blind girl, holding him in her embrace, "that I would love so dearly and would cherish so devotedly as this. The grayer and more worn, the dearer, father. Never let them say I am blind again. There's not a furrow in his face, there's not a hair upon his head that shall be forgotten in my prayers and thanks to heaven." Caleb managed to articulate, "My Bertha." "And in my blindness I believed him," said the girl, caressing him with tears of exquisite affection, "to be so different. And having him beside me, day by day, so mindful of me always, never dreamed of this." "The fresh, smart father in the blue coat, Bertha," said poor Caleb. "He's gone." "Nothing is gone," she answered. "Dearest father, no. Everything is here, in you. The father that I loved so well, the father that I never loved enough and never knew, the benefactor whom I first began to reverence and love because he had such sympathy for me, all are here in you. Nothing is dead to me. The soul of all that was most dear to me is here, here with the worn face and the gray head, and I am not blind, father, any longer." Dot's whole attention had been concentrated during this discourse upon the father and daughter. But looking now towards the little haymaker in the moorish meadow, she saw that the clock was within a few minutes of striking, and fell immediately into a nervous and excited state. "Father," said Bertha, hesitating. "Mary?" "Yes, my dear," returned Caleb. "Here she is." "There is no change in her. You never told me anything of her that was not true." "I should have done it, my dear, I am afraid," returned Caleb, "if I could have made her better than she was. But I must have changed her for the worse if I had changed her at all. Nothing could improve her, Bertha." Confident as the blind girl had been when she asked the question, her delight and pride in the reply, and her renewed embrace of Dot were charming to behold. "More changes than you think for may happen, though, my dear," said Dot. "Changes for the better, I mean. Changes for great joy to some of us. You mustn't let them startle you too much if any such should ever happen and affect you. Are those wheels upon the road? You've a quick ear, Bertha. Are they wheels?" "Yes, coming very fast." I I I know you have a quick ear," said Dot, placing her hand upon her heart, and evidently talking on as fast as she could to hide its palpitating state, "because I have noticed it often, and because you were so quick to find out that strange step last night. Though why you should have said, as I very well recollect you did say, Bertha, 'Whose step is that?' and why you should have taken any greater observation of it than any other step, I don't know. Though, as I said just now, there are great changes in the world, great changes, and we can't do better than prepare ourselves to be surprised at hardly anything." Caleb wondered what this meant, perceiving that she spoke to him no less than to his daughter. He saw her with astonishment, so fluttered and distressed that she could scarcely breathe, and holding to a chair to save herself from falling. "They are wheels indeed," she panted, "coming nearer, nearer, very close. And now you hear them stopping at the garden gate. And now you hear a step outside the door. The same step, Bertha, is it not? And now—" She uttered a wild cry of uncontrollable delight, and running up to Caleb, put her hands upon his eyes, as a young man rushed into the room, and flinging away his hat into the air, came sweeping down upon them. "Is it over?" cried Dot. "Yes." "Happily over?" "Yes." "Do you recollect the voice, dear Caleb? Did you ever hear the like of it before?" cried Dot. "If my boy in the golden South Americas was alive," said Caleb, trembling. "He is alive!" shrieked Dot, removing her hands from his eyes and clapping them in ecstasy. "Look at him! See where he stands before you, healthy and strong! Your own dear son! Your own dear, living, loving brother, Bertha!" All honor to the little creature for her transports. All honor to her tears and laughter when the three were locked in one another's arms. All honor to the heartiness with which she met the sunburnt sailor fellow with his dark streaming hair halfway, and never turned her rosy little mouth aside, but suffered him to kiss it freely and to press her to his bounding heart. And honor to the cuckoo, too. Why not? For bursting out of the trap door in the Moorish palace like a housebreaker, and hiccoughing 12 times on the assembled company as if he had got drunk for joy. The carrier, entering, started back, and well he might, to find himself in such good company. "Look, John," said Caleb exultingly, "look here! My own boy from the golden South Americas! My own son! Him that you fitted out and sent away himself! Him that you were always such a friend to!" The carrier advanced to seize him by the hand, but, recoiling as some feature in his face awakened a remembrance of the deaf man in the cart, said, "Edward, was it you?" "Now tell him all," cried Dot. "Tell him all, Edward, and don't spare me, for nothing shall make me spare myself in his eyes ever again." "I was the man," said Edward. And could you steal, disguised, into the house of your old friend?" rejoined the carrier. "There was a Frank boy once. How many years is it, Caleb, since we heard that he was dead, and had it proved, we thought? Who never would have done that." "There was a generous friend of mine once, more a father to me than a friend," said Edward, "who never would have judged me or any other man unheard. You were he, so I am certain you will hear me now." The carrier, with a troubled glance at Dot, who still kept far away from him, replied, "Well, that's but fair. I will." "You must know that when I left here, a boy," said Edward, "I was in love, and my love was returned. She was a very young girl who perhaps, you may tell me, didn't know her own mind. But I knew mine, and I had a passion for her." "You had!" exclaimed the carrier. "You!" "Indeed I had," returned the other, "and she returned it. I have ever since believed she did, and now I am sure she did." "Heaven help me," said the carrier. "This is worse than all." "Constant to her," said Edward, "and returning, full of hope, after many hardships and perils, to redeem my part of our old contract, I heard, 20 miles away, that she was false to me, that she had forgotten me, and had bestowed herself upon another and a richer man. I had no mind to reproach her, but I wished to see her, and to prove beyond dispute that this was true. I hoped she might have been forced into it, against her own desire and recollection. It would be small comfort, but it would be some, I thought, and on I came, that I might have the truth, the real truth, observing freely for myself and judging for myself, without obstruction on the one hand, or presenting my own influence, if I had any, before her on the other. I dressed myself unlike myself, you know how, and waited on the road, you know where. You had no suspicion of me, neither had she," pointing to Dot, "until I whispered in her ear at that fireside, and she so nearly betrayed me." "But when she knew that Edward was alive and had come back," sobbed Dot, now speaking for herself, as she had burned to do all through this narrative, "and when she knew his purpose, she advised him by all means to keep his secret close, for his old friend John Peerybingle was much too open in his nature, and too clumsy in all artifice, being a clumsy man in general," said Dot, half laughing and half crying, "to keep it for him. And when she—that's me, John," sobbed the little woman, "told him all, and how his sweetheart had believed him to be dead, and how she had at last been overpersuaded by her mother into a marriage which the silly, dear old thing called advantageous. And when she—that's me again, John, told him that they were not yet married, though close upon it, and that it would be nothing but a sacrifice if it went on, for there was no love on her side. And when he went nearly mad with joy to hear it, then she—that's me again, said she would go between them, as she had often done before in old times, John, and would sound his sweetheart, and be sure that what she—me again, John, said and thought was right. And it was right, John. And they were brought together, John. And they were married, John, an hour ago. And here's the bride. And Gruff and Tackleton may die a bachelor, and I'm a happy little woman. May. God bless you." She was an irresistible little woman, if that be anything to the purpose, and never so completely irresistible as in her present transports. There never were congratulations so endearing and delicious as those she lavished on herself and on the bride. Amid the tumult of emotions in his breast, the honest carrier had stood, confounded. Flying now towards her, Dot stretched out her hand to stop him, and retreated as before. "No, John, no. Hear all. Don't love me any more, John, till you have heard every word I have to say. It was wrong to have a secret from you, John. I'm very sorry. I didn't think it any harm till I came and sat down by you on the little stool last night. But when I knew by what was written in your face that you had seen me walking in the gallery with Edward, and when I knew what you thought, I felt how giddy and how wrong it was. But oh, dear John, how could you think so? Little woman, how she sobbed again. John Peerybingle would have caught her in his arms, but no, she wouldn't let him. Don't love me yet, please, John, not for a long time yet. When I was sad about this intended marriage, dear, it was because I remembered May and Edward such young lovers, and knew that her heart was far away from Tackleton. You believe that now, don't you, John? John was going to make another rush at this appeal, but she stopped him again. No, keep there, please, John. When I laugh at you, as I sometimes do, John, and call you clumsy and a dear old goose, and names of that sort, it's because I love you, John, so well, and take such pleasure in your ways, and wouldn't see you altered in the least respect to have you made a king tomorrow. Roar, said Caleb with unusual vigor. My opinion. And when I speak of people being middle-aged and steady, John, and pretend that we are a humdrum couple going on in a jog-trot sort of way, it's only because I'm a silly little thing, John, that I like sometimes to act a kind of play with baby and all that, and make believe. She saw that he was coming and stopped him again, but she was very nearly too late. No, don't love me for another minute or two, if you please, John. What I want most to tell you, I have kept to the last. My dear, good, generous John, when we were talking the other night about the cricket, I had it on my lips to say that at first I did not love you quite so dearly as I do now. That when I first came home here, I was half afraid I mightn't learn to love you every bit as well as I hoped and prayed I might, being so very young, John. But, dear John, every day and hour I loved you more and more. And if I could have loved you better than I do, the noble words I heard you say this morning would have made me. But I can't. All the affection that I had, it was a great deal, John, I gave you, as you well deserve, long, long ago, and I have no more left to give. Now, my dear husband, take me to your heart again. That's my home, John, and never, never think of sending me to any other. You never will derive so much delight from seeing a glorious little woman in the arms of a third party, as you would have felt if you had seen Dot run into the carrier's embrace. It was the most complete, unmitigated, soul-fraught little piece of earnestness that ever you beheld in all your days. You may be sure the carrier was in a state of perfect rapture, and you may be sure Dot was likewise, and you may be sure they all were, inclusive of Miss Slowboy, who wept copiously for joy, and wishing to include her young charge in the general interchange of congratulations, handed round the baby to everybody in succession, as if it were something to drink. But now the sound of wheels was heard again outside the door, and somebody exclaimed that Gruff and Tackleton was coming back. Speedily that worthy gentleman appeared, looking warm and flustered. "Why, what the devil's this, John Peerybingle?" said Tackleton. "There's some mistake. I appointed Mrs. Tackleton to meet me at the church, and I'll swear I passed her on the road on her way here. Oh, here she is. I beg your pardon, sir. I haven't the pleasure of knowing you, but if you can do me the favor to spare this young lady, she has rather a particular engagement this morning." "But I can't spare her," returned Edward. "I couldn't think of it." "What do you mean, you vagabond?" said Tackleton. "I mean that as I can make allowance for your being vexed," returned the other with a smile, "I am as deaf to harsh disclosure this morning as I was to I am as deaf to harsh discourse this morning as I was to all discourse last night." The look that Tackleton bestowed upon him, and the start he gave. "I am sorry, sir," said Edward, holding out May's left hand, and especially the third finger, "that the young lady can't accompany you to church, but as she has been there once this morning, perhaps you'll excuse her." Tackleton looked hard at the third finger, and took a little piece of silver paper, apparently containing a ring, from his waistcoat pocket. Miss Slowboy, said Tackleton, will you have the kindness to throw that in the fire? Thank ye. It was a previous engagement, quite an old engagement that prevented my wife from keeping her appointment with you, I assure you, said Edward. Mr. Tackleton will do me the justice to acknowledge that I revealed it to him faithfully, and that I told him many times. I never could forget it, said May, blushing. Oh, certainly, said Tackleton. Oh, to be sure. Oh, it's all right. It's quite correct. Mrs. Edward Plummer, I infer? That's the name, returned the bridegroom. Ah, I shouldn't have known you, sir, said Tackleton, scrutinizing his face narrowly and making a low bow. I give you joy, sir. Thank ye. Mrs. Peerybingle, said Tackleton, turning suddenly to where she stood with her husband, I am sorry. You haven't done me a very great kindness, but upon my life I am sorry. You are better than I thought you. John Peerybingle, I am sorry. You understand me. That's enough. It's quite correct, ladies and gentlemen all, and perfectly satisfactory. Good morning. With these words he carried it off, and carried himself off too, merely stopping at the door to take the flowers and favours from his horse's head, and to kick that animal once in the ribs, as a means of informing him that there was a screw loose in his arrangements. Of course it became a serious duty now to make such a day of it as should mark these events for a high feast and festival in the Peerybingle calendar for evermore. Accordingly, Dot went to work to produce such an entertainment as should reflect undying honour on the house and on every one concerned, and in a very short space of time she was up to her dimpled elbows in flour, and whitening the carrier's coat every time he came near her by stopping him to give him a kiss. That good fellow washed the greens, and peeled the turnips, and broke the plates, and upset iron pots full of cold water on the fire, and made himself useful in all sorts of ways, while a couple of professional assistants, hastily called in from somewhere in the neighbourhood, as on a point of life or death, ran against each other in all the doorways and round all the corners, and everybody tumbled over Tilly Slowboy and the baby everywhere. Tilly never came out in such force before. Her ubiquity was the theme of general admiration. She was a stumbling block in the passage at 25 minutes past 2, a man-trap in the kitchen at 2:30 precisely, and a pitfall in the garret at 25 minutes to 3. The baby's head was, as it were, a test and touchstone for every description of matter, animal, vegetable, and mineral. Nothing was in use that day that didn't come, at some time or other, into close acquaintance with it. Then there was a great expedition set on foot to go and find out Mrs. Fielding, and to be dismally penitent to that excellent gentlewoman, and to bring her back, by force if needful, to be happy and forgiving. And when the expedition first discovered her, she would listen to no terms at all, but said an unspeakable number of times that ever she should have lived to see the day, and couldn't be got to say anything else except, now carry me to the grave, which seemed absurd on account of her not being dead, or anything at all like it. After a time she lapsed into a state of dreadful calmness, and observed that when that unfortunate train of circumstances had occurred in the indigo trade, she had foreseen that she would be exposed, during her whole life, to every species of insult and contumely, and that she was glad to find it was the case, and begged they wouldn't trouble themselves about her, for what was she, oh dear, a nobody, but would forget that such a being lived, and would take their course in life without her. From this bitterly sarcastic mood she passed into an angry one, in which she gave vent to the remarkable expression that the worm would turn if trodden on, and after that she yielded to a soft regret, and said, if they had only given her their confidence, what might she not have had it in her power to suggest? Taking advantage of this crisis in her feelings, the expedition embraced her, and she very soon had her gloves on, and was on her way to John Peerybingle's in a state of unimpeachable gentility, with a paper parcel at her side containing a cap of state, almost as tall and quite as stiff as a mitre. Then there were Dot's father and mother to come, in another little chaise, and they were behind their time, and fears were entertained and there was much looking out for them down the road, and Mrs. Fielding always would look in the wrong and morally impossible direction, and being apprised thereof, hoped she might take the liberty of looking where she pleased. At last they came, a chubby little couple, jogging along in a snug and comfortable little way that quite belonged to the Dot family. And Dot and her mother, side by side, were wonderful to see. They were so like each other. Then Dot's mother had to renew her acquaintance with May's mother, and May's mother always stood on her gentility, and Dot's mother never stood on anything but her active little feet. And old Dot, so to call Dot's father, I forgot it wasn't his right name, but never mind, took liberties, and shook hands at first sight, and seemed to think a cap but so much starch and muslin, and didn't defer himself at all to the indigo trade, but said there was no help for it now, and in Mrs. Fielding's summing up, was a good-natured kind of man, but coarse, my dear. I wouldn't have missed Dot doing the honors in her wedding gown, my benison on her bright face, for any money. No, nor the good carrier, so jovial and so ruddy at the bottom of the table, nor the brown, fresh sailor fellow and his handsome wife, nor any one among them. To have missed the dinner would have been to miss as jolly and as stout a meal as man need eat, and to have missed the overflowing cups in which they drank the wedding day would have been the greatest miss of all. After dinner, Caleb sang the song about the sparkling bowl, as I'm a living man, hoping to keep so for a year or two. He sang it through. And by the by, a most unlooked for incident occurred just as he finished the last verse. There was a tap at the door, and a man came staggering in without saying with your leave or by your leave, with something heavy on his head. Setting this down in the middle of the table, symmetrically in the center of the nuts and apples, he said, Mr. Tackleton's compliments, and as he hasn't got no use for the cake himself, perhaps you'll eat it. And with those words he walked off. There was some surprise among the company, as you may imagine. Mrs. Fielding, being a lady of infinite discernment, suggested that the cake was poisoned, and related a narrative of a cake, which within her knowledge had turned a seminary for young ladies blue. But she was overruled by acclamation, and the cake was cut by May with much ceremony and rejoicing. I don't think anyone tasted it when there came another tap at the door, and the same man appeared again, having under his arm a vast brown paper parcel. Mr. Tackleton's compliments, and he sent a few toys for the baby. They ain't ugly. After the delivery of which expressions, he retired again. The whole party would have experienced great difficulty in finding words for their astonishment, even if they had had ample time to seek them. But they had none at all, for the messenger had scarcely shut the door behind them when there came another tap, and Tackleton himself walked in. Mrs. Peerybingle, said the toy merchant, hat in hand, I'm sorry. I'm more sorry than I was this morning. I have had time to think of it. John Peerybingle, I'm sour by disposition, but I can't help being sweetened, more or less, by coming face to face with such a man as you. Caleb, this unconscious little nurse gave me a broken hint last night, of which I have found the thread. I blush to think how easily I might have bound you and your daughter to me, and what a miserable idiot I was when I took her for one. Friends, one and all, my house is very lonely tonight. I have not so much as a cricket on my hearth. I have scared them all away. Be gracious to me. Let me join this happy party. He was at home in 5 minutes. You never saw such a fellow. What had he been doing with himself all his life, never to have known before his great capacity of being jovial? Or what had the fairies been doing with him to have effected such a change? John, you won't send me home this evening, will you? Whispered Dot. He had been very near it, though. There wanted but one living creature to make the party complete, and in the twinkling of an eye there he was, very thirsty with hard running, and engaged in hopeless endeavors to squeeze its head into a narrow pitcher. He had gone with the cart to its journey's end, very much disgusted with the absence of his master, and stupendously rebellious to the deputy. After lingering about the stable for some little time, vainly attempting to incite the old horse to the mutinous act of returning on his own account, he had walked into the tap room and laid himself down before the fire. But suddenly yielding to his conviction that the deputy was a humbug and must be abandoned, he had got up again, turned tail, and come home. There was a dance in the evening, with which general mention of that recreation I should have left it alone, if I had not some reason to suppose that it was quite an original dance, and one of a most uncommon figure. It was formed in an odd way. In this way. Edward, that sailor fellow, a good, free, dashing sort of fellow he was, had been telling them various marvels concerning parrots, and mines, and Mexicans, and gold dust, when all at once he took it in his head to jump up from his seat and propose a dance. For Bertha's harp was there, and she had such a hand upon it as you seldom hear. Dot, sly little piece of affectation when she chose, said her dancing days were over. I think because the carrier was smoking his pipe, and she liked sitting by him best. Mrs. Fielding had no choice, of course, but to say her dancing days were over after that, and everybody said the same, except May. May was ready. So May and Edward got up, amid great applause, to dance alone, and Bertha plays her liveliest tune. Well, if you'll believe me, they have not been dancing 5 minutes when suddenly the carrier flings his pipe away, takes Dot round the waist, dashes out into the room, and starts off with her, toe and heel, quite wonderfully. Tackleton no sooner sees this than he skims across to Mrs. Fielding, takes her round the waist, and follows suit. Old Dot no sooner sees this than up he is, all alive, whisks off Mrs. Dot in the middle of the dance, and is the foremost there. Caleb no sooner sees this than he clutches Tilly Slowboy by both hands and goes off at score. Miss Slowboy, firm in the belief that diving hotly in among the other couples and effecting any number of concussions with them is your only principle of footing it. Hark! How the cricket joins the music with its chirp, 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 and how the kettle hums. But what is this? Even as I listen to them blithely and turn towards Dot for one last glimpse of a little figure very pleasant to me, she and the rest have vanished into air, and I am left alone. A cricket sings upon the hearth, a broken child's toy lies upon the ground, and nothing else remains. The end. Thank you for joining me for this read-along together of The Cricket on the Hearth, the third of Charles Dickens' annual Christmas novels. That is a lovely story. I can understand why the Victorians would have dramatized that one for the stage so often, because it does seem like it would, it's very visual, and it would be something that you could put together nicely in a stage production. So that's interesting. As we mentioned earlier, that one was more popular on the stage than A Christmas Carol during Dickens's lifetime, even though A Christmas Carol was the bigger selling book at that time, as well as, continuing to our present day. But for a while it was as popular, and at least on the stage adaptations, even more popular than A Christmas Carol. So interesting story. I'd never read it before. Thank you guys for joining me for this read along. If I don't see you tomorrow, Happy New Year to you all. I look forward to seeing you next year. And if you do have any suggestions for one more story to read aloud, go ahead and post those up. I'm going to be recording those today and tomorrow. And so, yeah, I look forward to seeing you again next year. And if you can join us tomorrow for the tea party, it's going to be at 3 o'clock in Zoom. And so I can go ahead and send you the information on how to log in if you want to go ahead and RSVP that you are either going or you're interested in maybe attending tomorrow's tea party. All right. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful year of reading together. I have absolutely loved it. Amidst all of the weirdness that has been 2020, this has totally been a bright spot for me. And thank you so much for joining me for all of our reading together. It has been such a pleasure. I look forward to sharing more books and tea with you next year. Bye, friends.